The crisp autumn air of October 27, 1988, in Eugene, Oregon, carried with it the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of a peaceful evening, utterly unaware of the chilling mystery it was about to embrace. What began as an ordinary Thursday would soon unravel into a decades-long cold case, one that would grip the tight-knit community and leave an indelible mark of fear and profound sorrow. The disappearance of Susan Parker, a beloved elementary school teacher, wasn't just a local tragedy. It was a wound that refused to heal, a narrative of baffling silence that stunned everyone. For years, her name would echo through investigations and whispered conversations, a constant, unsettling question mark hovering over the tranquil landscape of the Pacific Northwest. Her eventual story, when its shocking conclusion finally arrived, would prove that some secrets, no matter how deeply buried, eventually find their way to the light, and the truth can be more astonishing than any fiction. Susan Parker was, by all accounts, the embodiment of warmth and dedication. A vibrant woman in her late 30s, she poured her heart and soul into teaching the inquisitive minds of her second-grade students at Northwood Elementary. Her classroom was a kaleidoscope of learning and laughter, a space where every child felt seen, valued, and encouraged to flourish. Colleagues admired her unwavering commitment, her infectious enthusiasm, and her thoughtful approach to education. Parents lauded her ability to connect with their children, often recalling how Susan had sparked a lifelong love of reading or uncovered a hidden talent in their little ones. She lived a quiet, structured life, one filled with purpose and the simple joys of her profession. Her routine was as predictable as the changing seasons: school, home, grading papers, preparing lesson plans, and occasionally indulging in a good book. This predictable rhythm was precisely what made her sudden vanishing so utterly incomprehensible. Her absence was a gaping void, not just in her classroom, but in the very fabric of the community she so dearly enriched. She was more than just a teacher. She was a pillar, a friendly face, a reassuring presence in the lives of many. That fateful Thursday began like any other. The morning commute was uneventful, the school day filled with the usual energetic chaos of children learning and playing. Susan, always meticulous, stayed a little late, as she often did, tidying her classroom, organizing materials for the next day's lessons, and perhaps even jotting down a few notes for a parent-teacher conference. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the schoolyard as she finally gathered her belongings. It was around 5:30 p.m. when she walked out of the school building, locking the door behind her with a practiced flick of the wrist. A brief, friendly exchange with a fellow teacher who was also leaving for the day marked the last confirmed sighting of Susan Parker. She smiled, waved, and made her way to her modest, reliable sedan parked in the nearly empty lot. The drive home, a familiar route she had traversed thousands of times, was less than 15 minutes through quiet, tree-lined streets. It was a journey she was expected to complete, a journey everyone assumed she would. But Susan Parker never arrived home. The minutes stretched into an hour, then two, and the initial spark of mild impatience in her household began to morph into a flicker of genuine concern. Her husband, David, a man usually accustomed to her punctual habits, initially brushed it off as an unexpected detour or a late meeting, but as darkness fully enveloped Eugene, a cold dread began to curl in his stomach. He made a few calls, first to the school, where the answering machine picked up, then to a couple of colleagues he knew Susan occasionally socialized with. No one had seen her since she left the school. The phone calls became more frantic, his voice laced with an increasing tremor of fear. By 8 p.m., the uncertainty had become unbearable. The routine was shattered, the expected rhythm replaced by a jarring silence. This wasn't like Susan. This was profoundly wrong. The first frantic call to the Eugene Police Department was made, a desperate plea for help that marked the official beginning of a nightmare that would plague the community for decades. The police dispatcher, accustomed to routine missing person reports, listened carefully as David, his voice cracking, explained that his wife, Susan Parker, an elementary school teacher, had simply vanished into the evening air. For more true crime stories that delve into the shadows of the past and unveil shocking truths, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing these compelling narratives to light." The dispatcher, hardened by years on the job, recognized the rising panic in David's voice, the raw edge of terror that transcended mere worry. What began as a domestic check-in swiftly escalated into something far more urgent. Within the hour, uniformed officers were knocking on the Parker family's front door, their solemn faces reflecting the growing gravity of the situation. Their initial questions were routine, yet each answer from David and concerned neighbors only deepened the mystery. No known enemies, no recent arguments, no financial troubles, just a beloved teacher who, by all accounts, had simply ceased to exist between her school and her home. The rapid shift from concern to alarm was palpable, turning a quiet residential street into a hub of flashing lights and hushed conversations. What started as a local police response quickly ballooned into a full-blown missing person investigation, the search beginning even before the first rays of dawn touched the Oregon sky. Detectives, called in from their evening activities, began the laborious process of piecing together Susan's last known movements. Every inch of her usual route home was meticulously scrutinized, from the school parking lot to her driveway, a journey that now seemed to hold a sinister secret. Officers canvassed the neighborhood she would have driven through, knocking on doors, interrupting dinners, and asking bewildered residents if they had seen anything out of the ordinary, a strange car, a pedestrian, anything that might seem amiss. Descriptions of Susan, her car, and her last known outfit were broadcast over police radios and circulated among patrol units. Witness interviews commenced in earnest, starting with the fellow teacher who had seen Susan leave, then expanding to school staff, parents, and anyone who might have interacted with her that day. The initial efforts were thorough, yet yielded dishearteningly little. No one recalled anything suspicious, only the usual weekday evening traffic, the fading light, and the quiet rhythm of suburban life. The absence of a clear starting point made the investigation feel like grasping at smoke. The true turning point, the moment concern solidified into dread, came just after sunrise. A patrol officer, systematically checking side streets and less traveled roads near Susan's supposed route, made a chilling discovery. Tucked away on a secluded dirt track about 3 miles from the school, hidden partially by a thicket of blackberry bushes, sat Susan Parker's modest, beige sedan. The sight of the car, seemingly abandoned, sent a jolt through the entire investigative team. Its discovery immediately intensified the mystery, transforming a missing person case into an active crime scene. The vehicle itself offered silent, yet screaming, evidence of foul play. The driver's side door was ajar, a small detail that spoke volumes. Inside, the interior showed clear signs of a struggle. A few items from Susan's purse were scattered across the passenger seat and floorboard, including her car keys, which lay incongruously on the driver's side floor, almost as if they had been dropped hastily. The most disturbing detail, however, was the faint, reddish-brown stain on the driver's seat upholstery, later confirmed to be blood. It was a minimal amount, but enough to extinguish any lingering hope that Susan had simply run away or suffered an accident. This was an abduction, a violent intervention into her routine life, and the implications were terrifying. The news of Susan Parker's abandoned car and the evident struggle rippled through Eugene like a shockwave. A vibrant, close-knit community that had always prided itself on its safety and tranquility was suddenly gripped by an invasive, chilling fear. The collective shock and disbelief were almost tangible. How could this happen here, to someone so universally loved and respected? The elementary school, usually a bastion of joyful noise, fell silent, its hallways heavy with unspoken questions. Parents held their children a little tighter, walked them to school, and scanned their surroundings with newfound suspicion. A palpable sense of vulnerability settled over the town, replacing its usual placid demeanor with an undercurrent of unease. Community meetings were hastily organized, not just for updates, but for collective grieving and an outpouring of support. Volunteers mobilized, printing flyers with Susan's smiling face, organizing search parties, and offering donations to a reward fund. Lampposts and storefronts became impromptu shrines, adorned with ribbons, prayers, and desperate pleas for Susan's safe return. Eugene was united in its heartbreak, but also in its resolve to find one of its own. For Susan's family, particularly her husband David, the discovery of the car and the grim evidence within it hurled them into an agonizing vortex of despair. The initial flicker of hope, however faint, that she might simply be lost or disoriented, was brutally extinguished. Now, every passing minute was an eternity, filled with gut-wrenching uncertainty and nightmarish imaginings. They clung to every word from the police, dissecting each nuance, searching for any glimmer of a lead. David, once a straightforward, practical man, found himself consumed by a desperate, all-encompassing agony. His pleas for information, broadcast on local news channels, were raw and heartbreaking, etched forever into the memories of those who watched. The emotional toll was immense, a crushing weight that threatened to pull them under. Sleep became a luxury, food an afterthought. Each ring of the telephone brought a fresh wave of adrenaline, only to be followed by renewed disappointment. They were caught in an unbearable limbo, waiting for news that could either bring closure or confirm their darkest fears, praying for a miracle while bracing for the worst. The case of Susan Parker was no longer just a police investigation. It was a wound in the heart of a family and a community, a gaping hole waiting to be filled with truth. The agonizing uncertainty became their constant companion, a cruel shadow that stretched endlessly into the future. The agonizing uncertainty became their constant companion, a cruel shadow that stretched endlessly into the future, and as days bled into weeks, then months, that shadow deepened into a cold, impenetrable wall. The initial flurry of activity surrounding Susan Parker's disappearance slowly, inevitably, began to subside. Detectives, tireless in their early efforts, found themselves hitting dead ends at every turn. Leads that initially seemed promising dissolved into nothingness, alibis checked out, and circumstantial evidence offered no clear path forward. The intense manhunt cooled, the search parties dwindled, and the police press conferences became less frequent, their updates increasingly vague. The case of Susan Parker, once front-page news, began its sorrowful transition into the realm of the unsolved, a growing void of unanswered questions. What happened on that quiet road, between the school and her home, remained a haunting mystery. The initial leads, though pursued vigorously, quickly dried up, leaving investigators with an ever-growing pile of reports but no concrete direction, no suspect, and most painfully, no Susan. One of the most significant challenges that plagued the investigation from its earliest days was the stark lack of conclusive evidence. In 1988, forensic technology was rudimentary compared to the sophisticated methods available today. DNA analysis, which would later revolutionize cold cases, was still in its infancy, largely unavailable for routine criminal investigations. The small bloodstain in Susan's car, while confirming foul play, was insufficient to identify an individual with any certainty. Fingerprints, if found, yielded no matches in contemporary databases. There was no clear weapon, no eyewitness to the abduction itself, and crucially, no body. The absence of Susan's remains was perhaps the most devastating blow, preventing any definitive cause of death or further forensic clues. Investigators were left grappling with a void, a crime committed with chilling efficiency, leaving behind only tantalizing whispers of a struggle and an empty car. The detectives tirelessly followed every tip, no matter how outlandish, interviewing countless individuals, but without a clear suspect or a body. The case spiraled into an increasingly frustrating, stagnant quagmire. Despite the diminishing leads, law enforcement and Susan's heartbroken family refused to let her memory fade into obscurity. Public appeals became a regular occurrence, especially on significant anniversaries of her disappearance. Local newspapers ran stories annually, sometimes biannually, featuring Susan's smiling photograph, a stark reminder of the vibrant life that had been snatched away. The family, with immense courage and resilience, appeared on television, their voices trembling with grief yet unwavering in their resolve to find answers. They maintained a dedicated hotline, hoping an anonymous tip might finally break the silence. Reward money, initially modest, grew over time, bolstered by community donations, a testament to the collective yearning for justice. These public efforts were not just about finding Susan, they were about keeping her story alive, ensuring that she was not forgotten, and holding on to the faintest thread of hope that someone, somewhere, held a piece of information that could shatter the wall of silence. Each appeal was a renewed cry into the void, a desperate attempt to stir a conscience or jog a forgotten memory. The unsolved case cast a long, dark shadow over the community of Eugene. The initial shock gave way to a pervasive sense of unease, a lingering fear that something sinister lurked beneath the calm surface of their lives. Trust, once freely given, became a commodity. Neighbors eyed strangers with suspicion, and parents instilled in their children a new level of caution, warnings about talking to strangers becoming more urgent, more frequent. The question of, "What happened to Susan Parker?" hung heavy in the air, a constant, unspoken query amongst friends and colleagues. It wasn't just a brutal crime, it was an assault on their collective sense of security, a reminder that even in their peaceful, tree-lined city, darkness could strike without warning. The community grieved not just for Susan, but for the innocence they had lost, the lingering question a permanent scar on their collective psyche. Every unsolved mystery leaves a void, but this particular one felt personal, a betrayal of the quiet rhythm of their lives. Years passed, marked by the slow, relentless procession of seasons. The vibrant fall colors that Susan had loved so much rotated into winter's starkness, then spring's renewal, only to cycle back to autumn again. Each October brought with it a fresh wave of heartache for Susan's family, a painful anniversary of her vanishing. Her file, once a thick binder brimming with active investigation notes, grew thin, eventually relegated to the cold case cabinet in the police department, gathering dust alongside other unsolved mysteries. The detectives who had initially worked the case retired, their faces etched with the frustration of an incomplete mission. Hopes, once burning bright, flickered and waned, occasionally reignited by a new theory or a revived public appeal, only to be extinguished once more by the persistent silence. For David and Susan's extended family, the passage of time did not heal, it merely deepened the persistent ache of not knowing. The laughter in their home was muted, replaced by a quiet longing. Susan's absence was a constant, tangible presence, a gaping hole that no amount of time or effort could fill. Her story became a tragic legend, a persistent heartbreak for all who had known and loved her, a quiet testament to a life abruptly, inexplicably stolen. The case remained dormant, a painful reminder of justice deferred, a narrative paused mid-sentence, waiting for an unexpected author to finally write its next chapter. The case remained dormant, a painful reminder of justice deferred, a narrative paused mid-sentence, waiting for an unexpected author to finally write its next chapter. And indeed, that author would eventually emerge, not in the form of a seasoned detective revisiting old files, but in the relentless march of scientific progress. Decades after Susan Parker vanished, the landscape of criminal investigation had undergone a profound transformation. What was once considered speculative fiction had become routine practice. Forensic science, particularly in the realm of DNA analysis, had evolved from a nascent, often unreliable tool into an incredibly precise and powerful instrument for truth. Where crime scenes in the 80s yielded only broad classifications like blood types or rudimentary fiber evidence, modern techniques could extract and amplify minute traces of genetic material, creating unique profiles with astonishing accuracy. New technologies allowed for the re-examination of evidence once deemed too degraded or insignificant to be useful, opening up avenues of inquiry that had been unthinkable at the time of Susan's disappearance. It was this quiet revolution in the laboratory, far removed from the dramatic police work of the past, that would ultimately breathe new life into Susan Parker's cold case. The passage of time, while eroding memories and scattering witnesses, ironically also provided the very advancements needed to unlock its secrets. Years, almost 3 full decades, had slipped by since Susan Parker walked out of Northwood Elementary for the last time. The yellowing file, once thick with active reports, had indeed been relegated to the archives, a testament to the frustrating lack of resolution. However, the relentless march of time also brought new faces, new perspectives, and a renewed commitment to justice. In the early 2010s, a specialized cold case unit within the Oregon State Police, bolstered by dedicated funding and a fresh mandate to tackle the state's most baffling unsolved mysteries, began the arduous task of systematically reviewing dormant files. It was during this painstaking process that the case of Susan Parker was pulled from its dusty slumber. A young, ambitious detective, Elizabeth Liz Chin, known for her meticulous approach and almost obsessive attention to detail, was assigned the file. She wasn't weighed down by the frustrations of the original investigation. She brought an objective, almost clinical, curiosity to the decades-old tragedy. Liz saw not a failure, but a challenge, an opportunity to apply the very tools her predecessors could only dream of. Liz's approach was revolutionary compared to the original investigation. She didn't just read the police reports, she deconstructed them, searching for overlooked details, inconsistencies, or evidence that might have been dismissed as irrelevant in 1988 but held immense potential in the modern era. Her team carefully catalogued every piece of physical evidence that had been preserved, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. The beige sedan, long since impounded and stored in a police evidence lot, was retrieved. Using cutting-edge forensic techniques, they meticulously re-examined the vehicle. Every fiber, every dust particle, every minute stain on the upholstery that had been meticulously documented and then stored, now faced a new battery of tests. The bloodstain, previously only identified as human blood, was a prime candidate for renewed analysis. Liz believed the answers lay not in new witnesses, who were now largely gone or had fading memories, but in the silent, immutable testimony of the physical evidence itself. It was a painstaking, often tedious process, but one driven by an unshakable conviction that the truth lay hidden within those preserved fragments of the past. The pivotal moment, the true break in the case, finally arrived after months of relentless re-examination. It centered on the minuscule blood sample collected from the driver's seat of Susan Parker's car. Original tests in 1988 could only confirm it was human blood, type A, but offered no further identification. Now, however, with vastly improved extraction methods and highly sensitive polymerase chain reaction techniques, forensic scientists were able to amplify the degraded DNA from that almost imperceptible stain. The sample, though minute, yielded a partial, yet distinct, genetic profile. It was enough. The DNA profile was then uploaded to CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database, a technological marvel that didn't even exist in its current form in 1988. Days turned into weeks of anxious waiting, a period of hushed anticipation within the cold case unit. Then, the notification came. A match. A partial match, but a match nonetheless. It wasn't a direct hit to a convicted felon, which was often the dream scenario for cold case detectives, but it pointed to a familial connection. The DNA belonged to a direct relative of an individual already in the system, specifically, a male whose profile was on file due to a prior, unrelated minor offense committed years after Susan's disappearance. The revelation sent a jolt of electricity through the cold case unit. A familial DNA match was not as definitive as a direct hit, but it was an undeniable, powerful new lead, the first tangible thread in almost 3 decades. The individual whose relative's DNA was in CODIS was identified as a man named Robert Jenkins. He was in his late 60s now, living a seemingly unremarkable life in a quiet suburb just outside Eugene. Crucially, he had been living in Eugene in 1988. Liz Chin and her team immediately launched a discreet, deep dive into Robert Jenkins's past, attempting to connect him to Susan Parker or the general vicinity of her disappearance. Initial inquiries revealed no direct connection between Jenkins and Susan. They hadn't worked together, weren't in the same social circles. He wasn't on any suspect list from the original investigation. He was, to all outward appearances, a ghost from the past, a completely unknown entity in the long, frustrating saga of Susan Parker. The shocking discovery of this unexpected connection, plucked from a decades-old bloodstain and illuminated by modern science, reignited the investigation with an intensity that had been dormant for a generation, setting the stage for the true, astonishing unraveling of the mystery that had gripped Eugene for so long. The pieces, once scattered and seemingly unconnected, were finally beginning to align, hinting at a truth far stranger and more chilling than anyone had ever imagined. The pieces, once scattered and seemingly unconnected, were finally beginning to align, hinting at a truth far stranger and more chilling than anyone had ever imagined. Robert Jenkins, a name previously unheard in connection to Susan Parker, now stood at the center of a reawakened storm. The familial DNA hit was the key that unlocked a door investigators had believed was permanently sealed. This man, an individual now in his late 60s, lived a life that, on the surface, appeared utterly mundane, almost forgettable. He resided in a modest house, neatly maintained, with a small garden vibrant with well-tended roses, just a few miles south of Eugene. He had been a long-time resident of the area, working for years at a local manufacturing plant before retiring quietly a decade prior. His neighbors described him as polite, if somewhat reserved, a man who kept to himself but always offered a friendly nod. He was not a community leader, not a prominent figure, just another face in the bustling mosaic of Eugene. This very ordinariness was what made his emergence as a suspect so profoundly disquieting, pulling the community's collective memory taut, trying to fit this innocuous image into the terrifying narrative of Susan Parker's abduction. He had blended seamlessly into the backdrop of daily life, an unremarked fixture, never once coming under the police radar during the original, harrowing investigation of 1988. Detective Liz Chin and her team dove headfirst into understanding Robert Jenkins, meticulously reconstructing his past, looking for any intersection with Susan Parker or any behavioral patterns that might explain the DNA link. They scoured public records, employment histories, and archives of local news for any mention of him. It quickly became apparent that Jenkins had no known direct connection to Susan. He wasn't a parent at her school, nor a colleague, and there was no record of them moving in the same social circles. This lack of a clear motive or relationship only deepened the mystery, suggesting a crime that might have been one of opportunity, a random, terrifying encounter that shattered two lives. Investigators also delved into his activities around 1988, trying to verify his whereabouts on the night of Susan's disappearance. His employment records showed he was indeed working at the manufacturing plant, a shift worker, which meant his hours varied. It was a painstaking process of cross-referencing old time cards, payroll logs, and even faint memories from former coworkers, trying to establish a precise timeline for that fateful October evening. The challenge was immense. Memories from so long ago are notoriously unreliable, clouded by time and the mundane details of everyday life. Yet, the DNA evidence was irrefutable, a silent, persistent whisper connecting him to the crime. Building the case against Jenkins was a meticulous, delicate dance, requiring an almost archaeological precision. The cold case unit knew that DNA evidence, while powerful, could be challenged, especially when it was a partial, familial match from a degraded sample. They needed to corroborate it with circumstantial evidence, to paint a picture so compelling that it left no room for doubt. They unearthed and re-interviewed surviving witnesses from 1988, focusing on anyone who might have observed anything unusual near the school or the secluded dirt track where Susan's car was found. While many memories were faded, a few individuals recalled seeing a beige sedan, similar to Susan's, followed by an older model, dark-colored pickup truck, a detail that had been noted in the original reports but never fully explored. A careful check of Jenkins's motor vehicle records from 1988 revealed he owned a dark blue Ford Ranger pickup. This seemingly minor detail, overlooked for decades, now took on startling significance, adding another layer to the emerging narrative. The investigators also combed through forensic reports from other unsolved cases in the greater Eugene area from the late 80s and early 90s, searching for similar patterns or any other DNA evidence that might link Jenkins to other crimes. It was a long shot, but sometimes predators reveal themselves through a series of escalating offenses. While no direct links to other violent crimes were immediately apparent through DNA, a pattern of minor, non-violent offenses such as trespassing and disturbing the peace emerged from his record, suggesting a man with a history of minor boundary violations and a disregard for public order. These incidents, while not violent, subtly chipped away at the image of the quiet, unassuming retiree. Furthermore, new forensic examination of the original crime scene photos revealed A faint, almost imperceptible tire track near where Susan's car was found, which, with advanced analysis, was consistent with the tire tread patterns of a Ford Ranger of that era. Every fragment, every rediscovered detail, was carefully catalogued and analyzed, slowly weaving a stronger, more damning tapestry. With the mounting evidence, and the undeniable DNA link, the cold case unit initiated covert surveillance on Robert Jenkins. This wasn't a sudden, aggressive move, but a cautious, calculated phase of the investigation designed to observe his current behavior, confirm his routine, and gather any additional information that might aid in the impending arrest and prosecution. Undercover officers maintained a discreet watch on his home, his movements, and his interactions. They recorded his daily patterns, noting his visits to the grocery store, his solitary walks, his quiet evenings at home. During this period, nothing overtly incriminating was observed. Jenkins continued to live his unassuming life, seemingly unaware that the net was slowly tightening around him. This phase was crucial, not just for gathering evidence, but for ensuring that when the time for arrest came, it would be executed flawlessly, without alarming Jenkins or giving him any opportunity to destroy potential evidence or flee. The investigators knew the stakes were incredibly high. Nearly 3 decades of pain, frustration, and unanswered questions rested on their shoulders. The strategic planning for the arrest became paramount. The element of surprise was critical, not only for the safety of the arresting officers but also to prevent Jenkins from potentially harming himself or destroying any remaining evidence. The team meticulously planned the timing, the location, and the precise tactics. They wanted to ensure the arrest occurred when he was alone, minimizing any risk to the public and ensuring he could be brought in for questioning immediately. Legal protocols were reviewed and double-checked, every warrant precisely drafted, every evidentiary detail reaffirmed. The cold case unit coordinated with the district attorney's office, ensuring they were fully prepared to move forward with prosecution once Jenkins was in custody. The weight of 3 decades of anticipation, of Susan's family's enduring grief, pressed heavily on every officer involved. The moment was fast approaching when the quiet, polite retiree, Robert Jenkins, would be confronted with the ghosts of his past, and the long-suffering community of Eugene would finally begin to comprehend the shocking truth behind Susan Parker's disappearance. The silent wait was almost over. Justice, though delayed, was ready to knock on his door. The silent wait was almost over. Justice, though delayed, was ready to knock on his door. That door, a typical suburban front door painted a tasteful beige, would soon become the focal point of a dramatic moment, a culmination of decades of tireless searching and scientific advancement. The morning chill of a late autumn day mirrored the cold dread that must have settled in Robert Jenkins's stomach as the flashing blue and red lights of unmarked police vehicles converged on his quiet street. Uniformed officers, accompanied by detectives in plain clothes, executed the precise plan crafted over weeks of intense preparation. They approached his front door with a calculated swiftness, their movements honed by training and experience. The knock was firm, authoritative, a sound that shattered the morning's tranquility. When Jenkins, likely still in his morning routine, answered, he was met not with a neighborly greeting, but with the stern faces of law enforcement. "Robert Jenkins? We have a warrant for your arrest." Detective Liz Chen's voice, calm yet resolute, cut through the stunned silence. The words hung in the air, weighted with the gravity of 30 years of unsolved mystery and unpunished crime. Jenkins, a man who had seamlessly blended into the background for so long, whose life epitomized quiet anonymity, visibly flinched. His initial expression was a mixture of confusion and disbelief, quickly replaced by a flicker of something colder, perhaps resignation, perhaps fear. The community, still largely unaware of the renewed investigation, watched in bewildered shock as police secured the scene, a flurry of activity transforming their peaceful neighborhood into a spectacle. Neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion, their whispers growing louder as they recognized the familiar face of Robert Jenkins being escorted, handcuffed, into a waiting police car. The seemingly ordinary retiree, the man who tended his roses and exchanged polite pleasantries, was now exposed as the primary suspect in one of Oregon's most enduring cold cases. The arrest itself was swift and efficient, devoid of any struggle, an anticlimax after so many years of anticipation, yet its implications reverberated far beyond that quiet street. News of the arrest spread like wildfire, first through local channels, then exploding onto national headlines. The dormant story of Susan Parker's disappearance, a tragedy that had faded into the background for many, suddenly roared back to life with an astonishing, shocking development. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. Reporters swarmed the Eugene Police Department, camped outside Jenkins's house, and descended upon Northwood Elementary, seeking any shred of information, any reaction from those who remembered Susan or knew Robert Jenkins. The community's reaction was a complex, overwhelming mix of emotions. There was an immense sense of relief, a collective exhale. That after so long, answers might finally be within reach. But this relief was deeply intertwined with profound betrayal and anger. Many who knew Jenkins, even casually, expressed utter disbelief. "Robert? No, not Robert," was a common refrain, spoken with incredulity. How could the man they knew, the quiet neighbor, the former factory worker, be capable of such a heinous act? The notion that a killer had walked among them, invisible and unsuspected for decades, was a chilling realization, shattering any remaining illusions of safety. For Susan's family, the news was a maelstrom of conflicting feelings, renewed grief mixed with a fragile, almost unbearable hope for justice. David Parker, now an older man whose life had been etched with the lines of unspoken sorrow, reserved his public statements, wary of celebrating too soon, yet clinging to the possibility of finally understanding what happened to his beloved wife. Following his arrest, Robert Jenkins was transported to the police station for initial interrogations. The detective team, led by Liz Chin, employed a deliberate and strategic approach. They didn't immediately bombard him with accusations, but rather presented the irrefutable DNA evidence, the silent witness that had finally spoken after 30 years. Jenkins, maintaining a stoic demeanor, initially denied any involvement, claiming he had no knowledge of Susan Parker or her disappearance. His answers were clipped, evasive, and rehearsed. He attempted to explain away the familial DNA match as a coincidence, a mistaken identity, or even a police fabrication. However, as the detectives systematically presented the accumulating body of evidence, the re-examined tire tracks matching his old pickup, the inconsistencies in his vague recollection of that specific October day, and the sheer impossibility of the DNA match being a random occurrence, his composure began to crack. He remained steadfast in his refusal to directly confess or provide details of Susan's fate, yet his denials became weaker, more defensive. While he offered no immediate confession, the interrogations established a crucial point. Robert Jenkins was indeed living in Eugene in 1988, and his routine could have plausibly placed him in the vicinity of the abduction. The silence surrounding Susan's final moments, however, persisted, a wall he was unwilling or unable to breach. With Jenkins in custody and the investigation proceeding, a renewed, more focused search for Susan's remains was launched. This time, investigators had a potential starting point, albeit a loose one: areas Jenkins frequented, properties he owned or had access to, and even remote locations he might have visited regularly in the late 1980s. The hope was that Jenkins, either through a moment of weakness during interrogation or through information gleaned from his past associations, might reveal the location of Susan's body. K-9 units, equipped with cadaver dogs, were deployed to remote, wooded areas near the general vicinity where Susan's car was found. Geologists and archaeologists were brought in to conduct ground-penetrating radar searches in specific, promising spots. The renewed efforts were intense, fueled by the conviction that bringing Susan home, even after all these years, was paramount for her family's true closure. However, despite the advanced technology and the determination of the search teams, the dense forests and vast, undeveloped lands surrounding Eugene proved to be expert keepers of secrets. Days turned into weeks of painstaking, often heartbreaking, work. Each unearthed object, each disturbed patch of earth, brought a flicker of hope that quickly faded into disappointment. The earth, it seemed, was not yet ready to give up its long-held secret. The ongoing search for Susan's remains became a stark illustration of the cruel reality of cold cases. Even with the suspect identified and evidence pointing towards his guilt, the final, most painful piece of the puzzle often remained elusive. Susan's family endured yet another agonizing wait, watching as search teams combed through familiar landscapes, knowing that every shovel full of dirt represented a potential answer, a potential end to their decades-long torment. The emotional toll was immense, a reopening of old wounds even as new ones formed. The media continued to cover every development, highlighting the ongoing efforts, and keeping Susan's story in the public consciousness. While the search yielded no immediate results, it underscored the unwavering commitment of law enforcement to not just solve the crime, but to bring Susan Parker home. The focus of the investigation now began to shift from finding her body to building an ironclad case against Robert Jenkins, preparing for the inevitable legal battle, and ensuring that, even in the absence of a body, justice for Susan would finally be served. The community, watching closely, understood that this was only the beginning of the end, a complex and painful journey through the justice system that would test their collective resolve. The arrest was a powerful first step, but the final chapter of Susan Parker's story still remained unwritten, hinging on what would unfold in the hallowed halls of the courthouse. The arrest was a powerful first step, but the final chapter of Susan Parker's story still remained unwritten, hinging on what would unfold in the hallowed halls of the courthouse. The entire city of Eugene, indeed the whole state of Oregon, held its breath, waiting for the legal proceedings to commence, a process that felt both agonizingly slow and utterly necessary. After decades of silence, of whispers and unanswered questions, the stage was finally set for the trial of Robert Jenkins. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, a mix of hope, trepidation, and a deeply felt desire for closure. Susan's family, particularly her husband David, prepared themselves for the ordeal, knowing that the courtroom would relive the terror of that October night, but also holding on to the fragile promise of justice finally being served. The trial began with the solemn march of jury selection, a careful, deliberate process to find 12 impartial citizens capable of weighing the evidence of a crime committed over a generation ago. Every seat in the public gallery was filled, a testament to the enduring impact of Susan's disappearance on the community. For many, it was not merely a legal proceeding, but a deeply personal reckoning, a chance to finally understand the truth that had eluded them for so long. The prosecution, led by a seasoned and determined district attorney, meticulously laid out their case against Robert Jenkins. Their primary weapon was the cutting-edge forensic evidence, the very technology unavailable in 1988 that had finally broken the cold case wide open. Central to their argument was the irrefutable DNA evidence, the partial genetic profile extracted from the minuscule bloodstain in Susan Parker's car, undeniably linked to Jenkins through familial matching. They presented expert testimony from forensic scientists who explained, in painstaking detail, how advancements in DNA analysis allowed them to revisit and interpret evidence that was once deemed insufficient. The jury saw magnified images of the genetic markers, heard the scientific certainty echoed in calm, professional voices. Beyond the DNA, the prosecution built a compelling circumstantial case, weaving together disparate threads that, when combined, pointed overwhelmingly to Jenkins's guilt. They presented the re-examined tire tracks, now definitively matched to the model and make of pickup truck Jenkins owned in 1988. They introduced maps and timelines, demonstrating Jenkins's proximity to both the school and the car's abandonment site on the evening of October 27, 1988. Every piece of old evidence, dusted off and re-evaluated through modern lenses, clicked into place like cogs in a long-dormant machine. Witness testimonies formed another crucial pillar of the prosecution's case, breathing life into the cold facts and reminding everyone of the human tragedy at its core. Susan's husband, David, now elderly and frail, took the stand, his voice hoarse with emotion as he recounted the agonizing night his wife vanished and the decades of torment that followed. He spoke of Susan's vibrant spirit, her dedication, and the gaping void her absence had left in his life and the lives of so many others. Colleagues from Northwood Elementary, many now retired, shared their last recollections of Susan, emphasizing her routine and the sudden, inexplicable nature of her disappearance. While no one had witnessed the abduction itself, their collective memories painted a vivid picture of Susan's life just before it was tragically cut short. The prosecution also called upon individuals who had known Robert Jenkins back in 1988. These witnesses, some hesitant, some visibly uncomfortable, testified to Jenkins's presence in the community, his general demeanor, and in some cases, recalled his dark blue Ford Ranger pickup truck, lending further weight to the tire track evidence. Their collective accounts, though individually minor, collectively fortified the prosecution's narrative, outlining not just the crime, but a life brutally interrupted and the devastating ripple effect it had on an entire community. The defense, facing an uphill battle against the weight of modern forensic science, adopted a strategy focused on casting doubt on the prosecution's narrative. Their primary argument revolved around the age of the DNA evidence and the circumstances of its collection and preservation. They questioned the integrity of the decades-old samples, suggesting potential contamination or degradation over time that could lead to erroneous results. Defense attorneys tried to portray the familial DNA match as circumstantial, arguing that a link to a relative did not definitively prove Robert Jenkins's direct involvement, and that other family members or individuals could have been responsible. They emphasized the lack of a direct eyewitness to the abduction, arguing that no one could definitively place Jenkins at the scene of the crime. They highlighted the absence of Susan Parker's body, attempting to suggest that without a victim, the entire case was built on speculation. They also presented Jenkins as a harmless, unassuming man, a pillar of his small immediate community, attempting to counter the image of a violent abductor. The defense lawyers methodically cross-examined prosecution witnesses, trying to poke holes in their memories, challenging the accuracy of their recollections from so long ago. Their strategy was less about proving Jenkins's innocence and more about creating enough reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors to prevent a conviction, a formidable task given the compelling evidence arrayed against their client. After weeks of testimony, emotional declarations, and rigorous legal arguments, the case finally went to the jury. The fate of Robert Jenkins, and the long-sought justice for Susan Parker, rested in their hands. The world outside the courtroom held its breath, countless eyes fixed on the doors through which the verdict would eventually emerge. Susan's family sat together, a tableau of quiet vigil, their hope a fragile thing tempered by 3 decades of disappointment. The jury deliberated for 3 tense days, each hour stretching into an eternity for those waiting. Speculation ran rife in the hallways and media tents outside. Could they truly convict a man on such old evidence, even with DNA? Would the defense's arguments about reasonable doubt resonate? When the court clerk finally announced that a verdict had been reached, the courtroom fell into a profound silence, broken only by the rapid thumping of hearts. Robert Jenkins stood impassively as the foreman delivered the verdict. Guilty. Guilty on all counts related to the abduction and murder of Susan Parker. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by choked sobs and quiet tears of relief. For Susan's family, it was a moment of profound, almost overwhelming, emotion. It was not joy, for joy was forever lost with Susan, but a deep, resonant wave of vindication, a recognition that justice, though delayed by 30 years, had finally, irrevocably, arrived. Guilty. Guilty on all counts related to the abduction and murder of Susan Parker. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by choked sobs and quiet tears of relief. For Susan's family, it was a moment of profound, almost overwhelming, emotion. It was not joy, for joy was forever lost with Susan, but a deep, resonant wave of vindication, a recognition that justice, though delayed by 30 years, had finally, irrevocably, arrived. Robert Jenkins stood motionless, his face an unreadable mask as the verdict was read. The decades-long silence surrounding Susan Parker's disappearance had been shattered, and in its wake, an undeniable truth had emerged, delivered by the solemn voice of the jury foreman. The formal resolution of the case came swiftly after the verdict. Robert Jenkins was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a sentence that reflected the heinous nature of his crime and the immense suffering he had inflicted upon Susan Parker and her loved ones. The judge, in delivering the sentence, spoke not only of the legal statutes but also of the profound impact of Jenkins's actions, emphasizing the cruelty of snatching a beloved teacher from her community and leaving her family in a decades-long abyss of uncertainty. For the legal teams, both prosecution and defense, the outcome marked the end of a long and arduous journey. For the prosecution, it was a hard-won victory, a testament to the power of perseverance and the transformative potential of forensic science. For the defense, despite their best efforts, it was a stark reminder of the irrefutable nature of scientifically proven truth. Jenkins was immediately remanded to the custody of the state prison system, disappearing from public view as silently as he had once walked among the unsuspecting citizens of Eugene. His name, once synonymous with quiet anonymity, was now forever etched into the grim annals of Oregon's criminal history. For Susan's family, the conviction of Robert Jenkins brought a bittersweet, complex form of closure. There was no triumphant celebration, no joyous relief that could ever erase the 30 years of anguish and loss. Instead, there was a profound sense of peace, a quiet understanding that the truth had finally been revealed, and the man responsible had been held accountable. David Parker, his eyes now holding a hint of their former warmth, spoke to the press outside the courthouse, his voice steady despite the visible tremor in his hands. He thanked the cold case unit, the forensic scientists, and the district attorney's office for their unwavering dedication. He spoke of Susan, not as a victim, but as the vibrant, loving woman she was, her memory finally honored by the justice delivered. The absence of her remains continued to be a painful void, a wound that would never fully heal, but knowing who had taken her, and that he would never harm another, provided a solace that had been denied to them for so long. Their reflections were not of vengeance, but of remembrance, and the enduring power of love that transcended even the darkest of tragedies. The verdict allowed them to finally grieve with a sense of certainty, to place a definitive period at the end of a sentence that had hung unfinished for far too long. The community of Eugene, having endured decades of uncertainty and an underlying current of fear, processed the truth with a mix of solemnity and a quiet sense of relief. The initial shock at Robert Jenkins's identity had transformed into a deeper understanding of the fragility of perceived safety. The lasting impact of Susan Parker's tragedy was undeniable. It had altered the way parents looked at their children's walks to school, the way neighbors viewed one another, and the way the community understood the lurking potential for evil. Yet, the resolution also brought a measure of healing. The dark cloud of the unsolved mystery, which had hung heavy over the town for decades, finally lifted. There was a collective sigh of relief that justice could, indeed, prevail, even against the formidable odds of time and forgotten memories. The story served as a poignant lesson that vigilance, compassion, and the relentless pursuit of truth are essential. The community embraced Susan's story, not just as a tragedy, but as a testament to their resilience and their unwavering commitment to remembering one of their own. Fundraisers continued in Susan's name, not for reward money, but for scholarships for aspiring teachers, ensuring her legacy of education and care would live on. The resolution of Susan Parker's case underscored the incredible dedication of countless individuals within law enforcement and the revolutionary advancements in forensic science. This was a testament to the fact that cold cases are never truly cold if there are determined individuals willing to pursue them. Detective Liz Chin, her cold case unit, and the unsung heroes in the forensic labs became symbols of hope for other families grappling with similar decades-old mysteries. Their perseverance, their refusal to let a case gather dust indefinitely, sent a powerful message that time does not diminish the value of a human life or the imperative for justice. It highlighted the evolving nature of crime solving, demonstrating how technology, initially unavailable, can ultimately become the silent witness that speaks volumes. For every family tormented by the unknown, Susan's case offered a beacon, a renewed belief that even the most deeply buried secrets can eventually be unearthed. It was a powerful vindication of the human element in policing, where empathy and relentless pursuit of truth drive the system forward, irrespective of how many years have passed. Susan Parker's legacy, far from being defined by her tragic end, lives on as that of a beloved teacher whose warmth touched generations of students. Her story, now fully told, serves as a powerful reminder of the enduring importance of community, of the devastating impact of violence, and the ultimate triumph of perseverance in the pursuit of justice. She is remembered not just as a victim, but as a vibrant individual, her memory honored by the relentless efforts to find her truth. The message is clear: victims are never forgotten, and the scales of justice, though sometimes slow, eventually balance. This case, closed after 30 long years, stands as a testament to the unwavering commitment to honoring those whose voices were silenced too soon. It reinforces the critical role that advancements in science play in delivering long overdue answers and serves as an enduring symbol of hope for families still waiting for their own moments of clarity. If this story resonated with you, if you found yourself gripped by the decades-long journey for truth in Susan Parker's case, please consider liking this video, sharing it with others, and commenting below with your thoughts. Your engagement helps us continue to bring these compelling true crime narratives to light, ensuring that these stories are never forgotten and that the victims are always remembered. Join us next time as we delve into another chilling unsolved mystery, exploring the depths of human nature and the relentless quest for justice. Thank you for watching.